Hello and welcome to the Private Audiobooks channel. This video is about long-term thinking for massive results, strategic mindset and mental discipline. Whether you're trying to fall asleep or commuting after work, it doesn't matter where or how you are, just put on your headphones and benefit from this audiobook video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be notified of future daily audiobook videos. You can also access previous audiobook videos from the playlist titled 2-Hour Audiobooks in the cards. Ready? Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Long-Term Thinking. There is a particular kind of sabotage that happens quietly, almost invisibly, in the background of our daily lives. It doesn't announce itself with drama or urgency. It simply nudges us, repeatedly, toward what feels good right now, toward what resolves the slight discomfort of this present moment. And in doing so, it slowly dismantles the future we claim to want. This sabotage is not external. It lives in the way we think, in the way our minds have been wired through millions of years of evolution to prioritize the immediate over the distant, the certain over the uncertain, the tangible over the abstract. Understanding this wiring is not about self-criticism or moral judgment. It is about recognizing a fundamental truth. The mind that helped our ancestors survive in environments of scarcity and immediate threat is not naturally equipped for the world we now inhabit, a world where the most important consequences of our choices often arrive years, sometimes decades, after the choice itself. Consider the structure of a typical day. You wake with intentions. Perhaps you've decided to build something meaningful, to develop a skill, to strengthen your body, to deepen a relationship, to create financial security. These intentions feel real in the morning light. They have weight. They matter to you. And yet, by evening, many of these intentions have been quietly traded away for smaller, more immediate satisfactions. An extra hour of shallow entertainment instead of the difficult work. The convenient meal instead of the nourishing one. The avoided conversation instead of the honest one. The purchase that feels good now instead of the investment that compounds later. What happened between morning and evening was not a failure of character. It was the predictable result of how your brain assesses value across time. The immediate option arrives in your consciousness with vivid, sensory detail. You can almost taste it, feel it, experience it in your imagination with remarkable clarity. The long-term option, by contrast, arrives as an abstraction, a concept, a story you tell yourself about a future that doesn't yet exist and may never exist. Your brain, designed to keep you alive in the next few minutes, the next few hours, treats these two options as if they exist in entirely different categories of reality. One is real. The other is theoretical. This is not a bug in your psychology. It is a feature, carefully refined over evolutionary time. Your ancestors who stopped to contemplate the long-term benefits of studying the stars while a predator approached did not become your ancestors. The ones who grabbed the immediate food, who responded to the immediate threat, who took the immediate opportunity for safety or reproduction, those are the ones whose nervous systems you inherited. You are the descendant of short-term thinkers, and that inheritance shapes every decision you make, whether you're aware of it or not. The modern world, however, has inverted the survival equation. The immediate is often the trap. The delayed is often the opportunity. The cookie in front of you, eaten daily, becomes the chronic disease in 20 years. The difficult conversation avoided becomes the relationship that slowly dies. The investment not made becomes the financial fragility that arrives in middle age. The skill not developed becomes the career that stalls. We live in an environment where short-term thinking, the very thing that kept our ancestors alive, now quietly undermines almost everything we claim to value about our future lives. Your brain's preference for immediate rewards is not subtle. It is measurable, quantifiable, predictable. Researchers have mapped this preference with remarkable precision. Given a choice between a smaller reward now and a larger reward later, most people will take the smaller reward now, even when the math clearly favors waiting. Offer someone $100 today or $110 in a week, and a significant portion will take the $100 today. The extra $10, arriving just 7 days later, somehow loses its value in the mental calculation. It becomes abstract, uncertain, less real than the money that could be in their hand right now. This phenomenon intensifies as the delay increases. $100 today versus $200 in 5 years? For many, the 100 today still wins, even though waiting would double their money. The future version of themselves, the one who will exist in 5 years, feels like a different person, someone whose needs and desires are somehow less important than the person sitting here right now making the choice. This is not irrationality. This is how discounting works in human psychology. The value of future rewards gets marked down, steeply, automatically, the further away they are in time. What makes this particularly insidious is that the discounting happens beneath conscious awareness. You don't experience it as a deliberate choice to value your future self less. You experience it as a natural preference, as simply wanting what you want. The immediate option just feels more compelling, more necessary, more justified. Your mind generates reasons, stories, rationalizations that make the short-term choice seem not just acceptable but wise. You're tired today. You've had a difficult week. You deserve this. You'll start tomorrow. Next week. Next month. The story changes, but the pattern remains the same. The immediate wins. The future waits. And the future, patient as it is, eventually arrives. But it arrives as the present, carrying the accumulated consequences of hundreds, thousands of these small moments when the immediate option won. The body you have at 50 is the result of the immediate choices you made at 30. The relationships you have at 40 are the result of the difficult conversations you avoided at 25. The financial position you occupy at 60 is the result of the investments you didn't make at 35. The person you are becoming is always the product of which version of yourself won the internal negotiation between now and later. This creates a strange temporal paradox. The future you, the one who will live with the consequences of today's choices, is entirely dependent on the present you, the one making those choices. But the present you, absorbed in the vividness of immediate experience, often acts as if the future you is someone else's problem, someone else's responsibility. And in a sense, this is psychologically accurate. Brain imaging studies show that when people think about their future selves, the neural patterns more closely resemble thinking about another person than thinking about themselves. Your future self is, neurologically speaking, a stranger. Understanding this is not about inducing guilt or shame. It is about recognizing the mechanism. The short-term mind is not evil or weak. It is simply optimized for a different kind of world, responding to a different set of pressures. In that ancestral environment, immediate rewards were genuinely more valuable because the future was deeply uncertain. Death, illness, violence, scarcity, these were constant possibilities. Taking the immediate reward made sense because there was no guarantee you would be alive later to enjoy the delayed one. Your brain still operates with this assumption, even though for most people reading these words, the future has become far more predictable than it was for your ancestors. The modern trap is that immediate gratification has been engineered, refined, optimized by entire industries dedicated to triggering your short-term reward circuits. Food has been engineered to hijack your taste and texture preferences, delivering intense immediate pleasure that your ancestors never encountered. Entertainment has been engineered to provide continuous, frictionless stimulation that keeps you engaged minute by minute, hour by hour. Social media has been engineered to deliver immediate micro-hits of validation and novelty. Shopping has been engineered to provide instant satisfaction with one-click purchasing and same-day delivery. Every system you interact with has been designed, often by very smart people using sophisticated research, to make the immediate option as compelling as possible. This is not an accident. There is enormous profit in immediate gratification. When you choose the immediate option, someone else usually captures the value. When you choose the delayed option, you usually capture the value yourself. The cookie manufacturer profits when you eat the cookie now. You profit when you develop the health that comes from not eating it. The entertainment platform profits when you watch for another hour. You profit when you use that hour to build something that compounds. The credit card company profits when you buy now and pay later. You profit when you save now and buy later. The entire architecture of consumer capitalism is oriented around getting you to choose now over later, because now is where the transactions happen, where the revenue flows, where the quarterly earnings are made. Recognizing this is not about becoming cynical or paranoid. It is about understanding the landscape you're navigating. You are walking through an environment that has been deliberately designed to trigger your short-term preferences at every turn. The fact that you sometimes choose the immediate option is not a personal failing. It is a testament to how effective this engineering has become. But understanding the design allows you to navigate it differently. You can start to see the prompts, the nudges, the engineered convenience for what they are: sophisticated systems designed to extract value from your preference for immediate gratification. The cost of short-term thinking compounds in ways that are difficult to see in the moment. Each individual choice seems small, almost trivial. One skipped workout. One avoided conversation. One impulse purchase. 1 hour of passive consumption instead of active creation. The immediate consequence of any single choice is usually negligible. This is precisely what makes the pattern so dangerous. If eating one cookie immediately caused visible harm, you would stop eating cookies. If skipping one workout immediately caused muscle loss, you would never skip. If avoiding one difficult conversation immediately destroyed a relationship, you would have the conversation. But the damage is gradual, cumulative, invisible until it crosses some threshold and suddenly becomes undeniable. This is how people wake up at 40 or 50 and wonder what happened. They didn't make one catastrophic choice. They made thousands of small choices, each one reasonable in isolation, each one favoring the comfort and certainty of the present moment over the abstract possibility of the future. The accumulation of these choices created a life, and that life is often very different from the one they imagined when they were younger, when the future still felt open and full of possibility. The particularly cruel aspect of this dynamic is that short-term choices often create conditions that make more short-term choices likely. Financial stress makes you more likely to seek immediate gratification because your stress system is activated and your capacity for self-regulation is depleted. Poor health makes you more likely to choose convenient food because you have less energy for preparation. Weak relationships make you more likely to seek distraction because genuine connection feels harder to access. Lack of meaning makes you more likely to pursue pleasure because in the absence of something larger, pleasure is all that remains. Short-term thinking creates short-term conditions, and those conditions reinforce more short-term thinking. It becomes a trap, a loop, a pattern that perpetuates itself. Breaking this pattern requires something specific. It requires building what might be called a long-term mind, a way of thinking that can hold future consequences as vividly as present pleasures, that can treat your future self with the same care and consideration you give to your present self, that can navigate a world designed for immediate gratification while maintaining focus on outcomes that arrive slowly, quietly, over years and decades. This is not a motivational project. Motivation, in the conventional sense, is itself often a short-term phenomenon, a spike of enthusiasm that fades when the work becomes difficult or boring or slow. Building a long-term mind is a structural project. It is about changing how you think about time, how you evaluate options, how you make decisions when your short-term and long-term interests conflict. It is about creating systems, habits, environments that make the long-term choice easier, more automatic, more likely to happen even when you're tired, stressed, distracted, or tempted. The first element of this structure is simple awareness. Most people move through their days without ever noticing the constant negotiation between their short-term and long-term interests. They experience their choices as unified, as simply doing what they want. But if you pause and observe, you'll notice that almost every significant choice contains this tension. Part of you wants the immediate thing. Part of you wants the future thing. And one of these parts usually wins without you consciously deciding which one should win. Awareness means noticing this negotiation as it happens, seeing the moment of choice rather than unconsciously defaulting to the immediate option. This awareness creates a small gap, a space between the impulse and the action. In that space, something different becomes possible. You can ask a simple question: which version of myself am I feeding with this choice? Am I feeding the version that wants comfort now, or the version that wants strength later? Neither answer is automatically wrong. Sometimes the immediate choice is genuinely the right one. Rest is valuable. Pleasure is valuable. Present moment experience is valuable. But the question makes the choice conscious rather than automatic. It converts an unconscious pattern into a deliberate decision. Over time, asking this question changes something fundamental. It changes who you understand yourself to be. You begin to see yourself not as a single, unified person with clear, consistent preferences, but as a collection of different selves spread across time, each with different interests, different priorities, different needs. The you of right now wants one thing. The you of next week wants something else. The you of next year wants something different still. And the you of a decade from now has interests that might be completely foreign to the person sitting here today. Which of these selves are you loyal to? Which one do you serve? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They determine the shape of your actual life. Most people, without realizing it, serve only their present self. They give that self everything it wants, moment by moment, day by day. Their future selves inherit whatever is left over, whatever their present self didn't consume. This is how you end up at 50 with a body that doesn't work well, relationships that feel hollow, financial stress that won't resolve, and a deep sense that time has somehow been stolen from you. It wasn't stolen. It was spent, consumed by a present self that took everything it wanted and left nothing for later. Building a long-term mind means reversing this relationship. It means treating your future self as someone real, someone whose life matters, someone whose interests deserve consideration in the decisions you make today. This sounds simple, but it requires a genuine psychological shift. It requires developing the capacity to imagine your future self with enough vividness and detail that they feel real to you, that their needs and desires carry weight in your present moment calculations. One way to begin this shift is through a specific kind of mental practice. Take a few minutes, close your eyes, and imagine yourself 10 years from now. Not the idealized version, not the fantasy of having achieved every goal, but the real version, the one who will actually exist, carrying the accumulated consequences of the choices you're making now. What does that person's daily life look like? What does their body feel like? What are their relationships like? What does their financial reality look like? What kind of work are they doing? How do they feel about the person they become? Build as much detail as you can. Make them specific. Make them real. Now imagine that person looking back at you, at the person you are right now, at this exact moment in time. What would they want to say to you? What would they thank you for? What would they wish you had done differently? What choices would they want you to make today that your present self finds difficult? This is not a thought experiment. This is a preview of a conversation that will actually happen. 10 years from now, you will look back at who you are today, and you will have thoughts and feelings about the choices you made. The only question is what those thoughts and feelings will be. This practice begins to dissolve the psychological distance between your present and future self. Your future self becomes less abstract, less theoretical, more like someone you know and care about. And when you care about someone, you make different choices. You consider their needs. You protect their interests. You don't consume everything and leave them with nothing. The same logic that makes you care about a child's future, that makes you want to leave them something better than what you inherited, can be applied to your own future self. They are just as real. They are just as dependent on you. And unlike a child, they will definitely exist, carrying your choices forward into time. The architecture of long-term thinking is built on this foundation, on this recognition that time is not your enemy unless you treat it as such. Time is the medium through which small actions compound into large outcomes, where consistent choices create trajectory, where patience produces results that immediate action never could. When you understand this, genuinely understand it not just intellectually but in your actual decision-making, something fundamental shifts. The choices that seem like sacrifices, like giving something up, begin to feel like something else entirely. They feel like investments, like deposits into an account that your future self will withdraw from. They feel like building, like creating, like an expression of care for someone who matters. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Long-Term Thinking. There is a particular kind of sabotage that happens quietly, almost invisibly, in the background of our daily lives. It doesn't announce itself with drama or urgency. It simply nudges us, repeatedly, toward what feels good right now, toward what resolves the slight discomfort of this present moment. And in doing so, it slowly dismantles the future we claim to want. This sabotage is not external. It lives in the way we think, in the way our minds have been wired through millions of years of evolution to prioritize the immediate over the distant, the certain over the uncertain, the tangible over the abstract. Understanding this wiring is not about self-criticism or moral judgment. It is about recognizing a fundamental truth. The mind that helped our ancestors survive in environments of scarcity and immediate threat is not naturally equipped for the world we now inhabit, a world where the most important consequences of our choices often arrive years, sometimes decades, after the choice itself. Consider the structure of a typical day. You wake with intentions. Perhaps you've decided to build something meaningful, to develop a skill, to strengthen your body, to deepen a relationship, to create financial security. These intentions feel real in the morning light. They have weight. They matter to you. And yet, by evening, many of these intentions have been quietly traded away for smaller, more immediate satisfactions. An extra hour of shallow entertainment instead of the difficult work. The convenient meal instead of the nourishing one. The avoided conversation instead of the honest one. The purchase that feels good now instead of the investment that compounds later. What happened between morning and evening was not a failure of character. It was the predictable result of how your brain assesses value across time. The immediate option arrives in your consciousness with vivid, sensory detail. You can almost taste it, feel it, experience it in your imagination with remarkable clarity. The long-term option, by contrast, arrives as an abstraction, a concept, a story you tell yourself about a future that doesn't yet exist and may never exist. Your brain, designed to keep you alive in the next few minutes, the next few hours, treats these two options as if they exist in entirely different categories of reality. One is real. The other is theoretical. This is not a bug in your psychology. It is a feature, carefully refined over evolutionary time. Your ancestors who stopped to contemplate the long-term benefits of studying the stars while a predator approached did not become your ancestors. The ones who grabbed the immediate food, who responded to the immediate threat, who took the immediate opportunity for safety or reproduction, those are the ones whose nervous systems you inherited. You are the descendant of short-term thinkers, and that inheritance shapes every decision you make, whether you're aware of it or not. The modern world, however, has inverted the survival equation. The immediate is often the trap. The delayed is often the opportunity. The cookie in front of you, eaten daily, becomes the chronic disease in 20 years. The difficult conversation avoided becomes the relationship that slowly dies. The investment not made becomes the financial fragility that arrives in middle age. The skill not developed becomes the career that stalls. We live in an environment where short-term thinking, the very thing that kept our ancestors alive, now quietly undermines almost everything we claim to value about our future lives. Your brain's preference for immediate rewards is not subtle. It is measurable, quantifiable, predictable. Researchers have mapped this preference with remarkable precision. Given a choice between a smaller reward now and a larger reward later, most people will take the smaller reward now, even when the math clearly favors waiting. Offer someone $100 today or $110 in a week, and a significant portion will take the $100 today. The extra $10, arriving just 7 days later, somehow loses its value in the mental calculation. It becomes abstract, uncertain, less real than the money that could be in their hand right now. This phenomenon intensifies as the delay increases. $100 today versus $200 in 5 years? For many, the $100 today still wins, even though waiting would double their money. The future version of themselves, the one who will exist in 5 years, feels like a different person, someone whose needs and desires are somehow less important than the person sitting here right now making the choice. This is not irrationality. This is how discounting works in human psychology. The value of future rewards gets marked down, steeply, automatically, the further away they are in time. What makes this particularly insidious is that the discounting happens beneath conscious awareness. You don't experience it as a deliberate choice to value your future self less. You experience it as a natural preference, as simply wanting what you want. The immediate option just feels more compelling, more necessary, more justified. Your mind generates reasons, stories, rationalizations that make the short-term choice seem not just acceptable but wise. You're tired today. You've had a difficult week. You deserve this. You'll start tomorrow. Next week. Next month. The story changes, but the pattern remains the same. The immediate wins. The future waits. And the future, patient as it is, eventually arrives. But it arrives as the present, carrying the accumulated consequences of hundreds, thousands of these small moments when the immediate option won. The body you have at 50 is the result of the immediate choices you made at 30. The relationships you have at 40 are the result of the difficult conversations you avoided at 25. The financial position you occupy at 60 is the result of the investments you didn't make at 35. The person you are becoming is always the product of which version of yourself won the internal negotiation between now and later. This creates a strange temporal paradox. The future you, the one who will live with the consequences of today's choices, is entirely dependent on the present you, the one making those choices. But the present you, absorbed in the vividness of immediate experience, often acts as if the future you is someone else's problem, someone else's responsibility. And in a sense, this is psychologically accurate. Brain imaging studies show that when people think about their future selves, the neural patterns more closely resemble thinking about another person than thinking about themselves. Your future self is, neurologically speaking, a stranger. Understanding this is not about inducing guilt or shame. It is about recognizing the mechanism. The short-term mind is not evil or weak. It is simply optimized for a different kind of world, responding to a different set of pressures. In that ancestral environment, immediate rewards were genuinely more valuable because the future was deeply uncertain. Death, illness, violence, scarcity, these were constant possibilities. Taking the immediate reward made sense because there was no guarantee you would be alive later to enjoy the delayed one. Your brain still operates with this assumption, even though for most people reading these words, the future has become far more predictable than it was for your ancestors. The modern trap is that immediate gratification has been engineered, refined, optimized by entire industries dedicated to triggering your short-term reward circuits. Food has been engineered to hijack your taste and texture preferences, delivering intense immediate pleasure that your ancestors never encountered. Entertainment has been engineered to provide continuous, frictionless stimulation that keeps you engaged minute by minute, hour by hour. Social media has been engineered to deliver immediate micro-hits of validation and novelty. Shopping has been engineered to provide instant satisfaction with one-click purchasing and same-day delivery. Every system you interact with has been designed, often by very smart people using sophisticated research, to make the immediate option as compelling as possible. This is not an accident. There is enormous profit in immediate gratification. When you choose the immediate option, someone else usually captures the value. When you choose the delayed option, you usually capture the value yourself. The cookie manufacturer profits when you eat the cookie now. You profit when you develop the health that comes from not eating it. The entertainment platform profits when you watch for another hour. You profit when you use that hour to build something that compounds. The credit card company profits when you buy now and pay later. You profit when you save now and buy later. The entire architecture of consumer capitalism is oriented around getting you to choose now over later, because now is where the transactions happen, where the revenue flows, where the quarterly earnings are made. Recognizing this is not about becoming cynical or paranoid. It is about understanding the landscape you're navigating. You are walking through an environment that has been deliberately designed to trigger your short-term preferences at every turn. The fact that you sometimes choose the immediate option is not a personal failing. It is a testament to how effective this engineering has become. But understanding the design allows you to navigate it differently. You can start to see the prompts, the nudges, the engineered convenience for what they are: sophisticated systems designed to extract value from your preference for immediate gratification. The cost of short-term thinking compounds in ways that are difficult to see in the moment. Each individual choice seems small, almost trivial. One skipped workout. One avoided conversation. One impulse purchase. 1 hour of passive consumption instead of active creation. The immediate consequence of any single choice is usually negligible. This is precisely what makes the pattern so dangerous. If eating one cookie immediately caused visible harm, you would stop eating cookies. If skipping one workout immediately caused muscle loss, you would never skip. If avoiding one difficult conversation immediately destroyed a relationship, you would have the conversation. But the damage is gradual, cumulative, invisible until it crosses some threshold and suddenly becomes undeniable. This is how people wake up at 40 or 50 and wonder what happened. They didn't make one catastrophic choice. They made thousands of small choices, each one reasonable in isolation, each one favoring the comfort and certainty of the present moment over the abstract possibility of the future. The accumulation of these choices created a life, and that life is often very different from the one they imagined when they were younger, when the future still felt open and full of possibility. The particularly cruel aspect of this dynamic is that short-term choices often create conditions that make more short-term choices likely. Financial stress makes you more likely to seek immediate gratification because your stress system is activated and your capacity for self-regulation is depleted. Poor health makes you more likely to choose convenient food because you have less energy for preparation. Weak relationships make you more likely to seek distraction because genuine connection feels harder to access. Lack of meaning makes you more likely to pursue pleasure because in the absence of something larger, pleasure is all that remains. Short-term thinking creates short-term conditions, and those conditions reinforce more short-term thinking. It becomes a trap, a loop, a pattern that perpetuates itself. Breaking this pattern requires something specific. It requires building what might be called a long-term mind, a way of thinking that can hold future consequences as vividly as present pleasures, that can treat your future self with the same care and consideration you give to your present self, that can navigate a world designed for immediate gratification while maintaining focus on outcomes that arrive slowly, quietly, over years and decades. This is not a motivational project. Motivation, in the conventional sense, is itself often a short-term phenomenon, a spike of enthusiasm that fades when the work becomes difficult or boring or slow. Building a long-term mind is a structural project. It is about changing how you think about time, how you evaluate options, how you make decisions when your short-term and long-term interests conflict. It is about creating systems, habits, environments that make the long-term choice easier, more automatic, more likely to happen even when you're tired, stressed, distracted, or tempted. The first element of this structure is simple awareness. Most people move through their days without ever noticing the constant negotiation between their short-term and long-term interests. They experience their choices as unified, as simply doing what they want. But if you pause and observe, you'll notice that almost every significant choice contains this tension. Part of you wants the immediate thing. Part of you wants the future thing. And one of these parts usually wins without you consciously deciding which one should win. Awareness means noticing this negotiation as it happens, seeing the moment of choice rather than unconsciously defaulting to the immediate option. This awareness creates a small gap, a space between the impulse and the action. In that space, something different becomes possible. You can ask a simple question: which version of myself am I feeding with this choice? Am I feeding the version that wants comfort now, or the version that wants strength later? Neither answer is automatically wrong. Sometimes the immediate choice is genuinely the right one. Rest is valuable. Pleasure is valuable. Present moment experience is valuable. But the question makes the choice conscious rather than automatic. It converts an unconscious pattern into a deliberate decision. Over time, asking this question changes something fundamental. It changes who you understand yourself to be. You begin to see yourself not as a single, unified person with clear, consistent preferences, but as a collection of different selves spread across time, each with different interests, different priorities, different needs. The you of right now wants one thing. The you of next week wants something else. The you of next year wants something different still. And the you of a decade from now has interests that might be completely foreign to the person sitting here today. Which of these selves are you loyal to? Which one do you serve? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They determine the shape of your actual life. Most people, without realizing it, serve only their present self. They give that self everything it wants, moment by moment, day by day. Their future selves inherit whatever is left over, whatever their present self didn't consume. This is how you end up at 50 with a body that doesn't work well, relationships that feel hollow, financial stress that won't resolve, and a deep sense that time has somehow been stolen from you. It wasn't stolen. It was spent, consumed by a present self that took everything it wanted and left nothing for later. Building a long-term mind means reversing this relationship. It means treating your future self as someone real, someone whose life matters, someone whose interests deserve consideration in the decisions you make today. This sounds simple, but it requires a genuine psychological shift. It requires developing the capacity to imagine your future self with enough vividness and detail that they feel real to you, that their needs and desires carry weight in your present moment calculations. One way to begin this shift is through a specific kind of mental practice. Take a few minutes, close your eyes, and imagine yourself 10 years from now. Not the idealized version, not the fantasy of having achieved every goal, but the real version, the one who will actually exist, carrying the accumulated consequences of the choices you're making now. What does that person's daily life look like? What does their body feel like? What are their relationships like? What does their financial reality look like? What kind of work are they doing? How do they feel about the person they become? Build as much detail as you can. Make them specific. Make them real. Now imagine that person looking back at you, at the person you are right now, at this exact moment in time. What would they want to say to you? What would they thank you for? What would they wish you had done differently? What choices would they want you to make today that your present self finds difficult? This is not a thought experiment. This is a preview of a conversation that will actually happen. 10 years from now, you will look back at who you are today, and you will have thoughts and feelings about the choices you made. The only question is what those thoughts and feelings will be. This practice begins to dissolve the psychological distance between your present and future self. Your future self becomes less abstract, less theoretical, more like someone you know and care about. And when you care about someone, you make different choices. You consider their needs. You protect their interests. You don't consume everything and leave them with nothing. The same logic that makes you care about a child's future, that makes you want to leave them something better than what you inherited, can be applied to your own future self. They are just as real. They are just as dependent on you. And unlike a child, they will definitely exist, carrying your choices forward into time. The architecture of long-term thinking is built on this foundation, on this recognition that time is not your enemy unless you treat it as such. Time is the medium through which small actions compound into large outcomes, where consistent choices create trajectory, where patience produces results that immediate action never could. When you understand this, genuinely understand it not just intellectually but in your actual decision-making, something fundamental shifts. The choices that seem like sacrifices, like giving something up, begin to feel like something else entirely. They feel like investments, like deposits into an account that your future self will withdraw from. They feel like building, like creating, like an expression of care for someone who matters. The people who think in long time frames are not fundamentally different from those who don't. They were not born with superior willpower or extraordinary discipline. They do not possess some rare genetic advantage that makes delayed gratification easy or natural. What distinguishes them is something more subtle and more learnable. They have developed a particular relationship with time, with uncertainty, and with the gap between action and result. They have learned to find satisfaction not in immediate outcomes, but in the process of accumulation itself, in the quiet knowledge that they are building something that will reveal itself slowly, over months and years, in ways that cannot be rushed or forced. This is not a personality trait. It is a skill, a capacity that can be developed through practice and attention. But it requires understanding what you are actually practicing. Most people think of patience as a form of endurance, as gritting your teeth and suffering through the wait until the reward finally arrives. This is not patience. This is tolerance of discomfort, which is valuable in its own right but fundamentally different from the patience that characterizes long-term thinking. True patience is not about enduring the wait. It is about finding a different kind of satisfaction during the wait, about learning to value the process of growth itself rather than only valuing the final result. Consider someone learning a complex skill, a musical instrument, a language, a craft that requires thousands of hours of practice to reach competence. In the early stages, progress is both rapid and invisible. Rapid because you are moving from zero knowledge to some knowledge, which represents infinite percentage growth. Invisible because you still cannot do the thing you set out to do. You cannot play the song, speak the language, create the work. What you can do is clumsy, effortful, frustrating. Most people abandon the pursuit during this phase. They experience the gap between their current ability and their desired ability as evidence of failure, as proof that they are not suited for this, that they should try something else, something that produces results more quickly. The person who persists through this phase has learned something specific. They have learned that the gap between current and desired ability is not a problem to be solved immediately. It is simply information about where they are in a longer process. The gap will close, but it will close slowly, invisibly, through accumulated practice that often feels like it is producing no results at all. Days will pass where you practice and seem to get no better. Weeks will pass where your ability feels static, unchanging. And then suddenly, without warning, something clicks. The thing that was impossible last week is now merely difficult. The thing that was difficult last month is now almost easy. But this shift did not happen suddenly. It happened across all those apparently static days, through neurological changes too subtle to feel, through micro-improvements too small to notice, through a process of learning that operates beneath conscious awareness. Understanding this, truly understanding it, changes how you relate to practice. You stop needing evidence of immediate progress. You stop checking constantly to see if you have improved. You develop trust in the process itself, in the simple fact that consistent practice produces results even when those results are not yet visible. This trust is not blind faith. It is based on experience, on having seen this pattern repeat itself across different domains, on knowing that invisible progress is still progress, that the absence of visible results does not mean nothing is happening. This capacity to trust invisible progress is perhaps the most important psychological skill in long-term thinking. Almost everything worth building takes longer than expected and produces results more slowly than hoped. Financial investments compound slowly. Relationships deepen slowly. Skills develop slowly. Health improvements accumulate slowly. Career advancement happens slowly. Reputation is built slowly. The gap between action and visible result can be months or years. During this gap, you receive almost no feedback that what you are doing is working. The only thing you have is the process itself, the daily practice, the consistent choice, the small action repeated over time. People who cannot tolerate this gap, who need constant visible evidence that their efforts are producing results, end up trapped in activities that provide immediate feedback. They chase the work that shows results quickly, the investments that promise fast returns, the relationships that feel intense immediately, the status that arrives rapidly. And sometimes they get what they chase. But what arrives quickly usually leaves quickly. The work that shows immediate results is often shallow work that anyone can do. The investment that promises fast returns is often high risk or unsustainable. The relationship that feels intense immediately often lacks the foundation for long-term depth. The status that arrives rapidly is often fragile, dependent on continuing to perform in ways that may not serve your long-term interests. What compounds, what lasts, what becomes truly valuable almost always requires moving through extended periods where nothing visible is happening. You are writing every day but no one is reading. You are investing every month but the account grows slowly. You are having small, honest conversations, but the relationship still feels distant. You are eating well and exercising, but your body looks the same. You are learning, but you still cannot do the thing. During these periods, the short-term mind screams at you to stop, to do something else, to find an activity that produces faster results. And this is where long-term thinking reveals itself not as an intellectual position but as a felt capacity to continue anyway, to find satisfaction in the continuation itself rather than in visible progress. This satisfaction in continuation is built on a specific realization. The realization is that small advantages, accumulated consistently over time, compound into results that are impossible to achieve through any amount of intense, short-term effort. This is mathematically true. This is empirically true. This is historically true across every domain of human achievement. And yet it remains emotionally difficult to believe because the early stages of accumulation produce results so small that they seem irrelevant, pointless, not worth the effort. If you save a small amount of money every month, the first year produces almost nothing. The amount you have saved seems trivial compared to the things you want to buy, the life you want to live. It would be easy, emotionally easy, to spend that money on something that produces immediate satisfaction. But if you continue saving, year after year, the money begins to compound. Not just through investment returns, but through the psychological changes that happen when you have accumulated a financial buffer. You make different choices. You take different risks. You have different options. The person with 1 year of savings and the person with 10 years of savings live in effectively different worlds, even if their incomes are identical. The same pattern appears everywhere. If you read for 30 minutes every day, the first month produces barely noticeable changes. You have read perhaps 2 or 3 books. Your knowledge has expanded slightly. You are essentially the same person you were before you started. But if you continue reading 30 minutes a day for 10 years, you have read hundreds of books. Your knowledge base is fundamentally different. Your thinking has been shaped by dozens of perspectives, frameworks, ideas that you would never have encountered otherwise. The person who has read consistently for 10 years and the person who has not are almost incomparable in their capacity to think clearly about complex topics. The same principle applies to relationships. Small, consistent acts of attention, care, and honesty create depth that cannot be manufactured through occasional grand gestures. The relationship that has been tended carefully for 10 years, through daily small choices to be present and truthful, is structurally different from the relationship that has been neglected for 9 years and then given intense attention for 1. The depth is in the consistency, in the slow accumulation of shared experience, in the gradual building of trust through repeated demonstration that you will show up, that you will care, that you will choose the relationship even when it is inconvenient or uncomfortable. What makes this accumulation powerful is precisely what makes it easy to dismiss in the early stages. The daily action is small enough to be trivial. Saving a small amount feels like it makes no difference. Reading for 30 minutes feels insufficient. A single conversation feels like it barely moves the needle. The gap between the action and the desired outcome is so large that the action seems absurd, like trying to cross an ocean by collecting raindrops. And in a sense, that is exactly what you are doing. You are crossing an ocean by collecting raindrops. But the thing about raindrops is that they actually do accumulate. Given enough time, given enough consistency, they fill the container. They become the ocean. People who think in long time frames understand this accumulation at a visceral level. They do not need to see the ocean to know it is forming. They can feel satisfaction in the single raindrop because they trust the process of accumulation. This trust is not irrational or naive. It is based on a clear-eyed understanding of how compounding works, how small consistent actions produce results that large inconsistent actions never could, how patience is not a passive waiting but an active confidence in mathematical and psychological realities that most people refuse to accept because accepting them requires tolerating extended periods of invisible progress. The discipline of delayed gratification, the capacity to choose the larger later reward over the smaller immediate reward, is often misunderstood as a form of self-denial, as saying no to yourself, as sacrificing pleasure for some abstract future benefit. This framing makes delayed gratification feel like suffering, like deprivation, like you are punishing yourself for some uncertain future payoff. And when delayed gratification is framed this way, it becomes unsustainable. No one can maintain a sense of deprivation indefinitely. Eventually, the deprivation becomes intolerable and the dam breaks. You binge on whatever you have been denying yourself, often to a degree that erases any benefit from the prior restraint. But delayed gratification, properly understood, is not deprivation. It is a reorientation of what you find satisfying. It is learning to take pleasure in the process of building rather than only in the finished product. It is finding satisfaction in the knowledge that you are acting in alignment with your long-term interests, that you are making choices today that your future self will thank you for, that you are living according to a set of principles rather than according to moment-by-moment impulses. This satisfaction is real. It is not a consolation prize or a lesser pleasure. It is a different category of pleasure, one that becomes available only when you develop the capacity to see your life from a longer time horizon. When you make a choice that serves your long-term interests rather than your immediate impulses, something happens in that moment. There is a small sense of pride, of self-respect, of alignment between who you are and who you want to be. This feeling is subtle. It does not have the intensity of immediate gratification. It does not flood your system with dopamine the way sugar or entertainment or validation does. But it has a different quality. It is quieter, steadier, more durable. It does not spike and crash. It accumulates. Each time you make the long-term choice, you are depositing into an internal account of self-trust. You are demonstrating to yourself that you are capable of acting according to your values rather than your impulses. And over time, this self-trust becomes its own reward, more satisfying than any immediate pleasure because it changes who you understand yourself to be. This is the hidden advantage of long-term thinking. It is not just that you achieve better outcomes in the future. It is that you become someone different in the present. You develop a relationship with yourself characterized by trust rather than suspicion, by respect rather than disappointment. You stop being at war with yourself, stop experiencing your own behavior as unpredictable or out of control. You become someone who does what they say they will do, who follows through on commitments, who can be trusted by themselves and by others. This internal coherence, this sense of being a unified person rather than a collection of conflicting impulses, is itself a form of success independent of any external outcome. The people who build significant things over long timeframes share this quality. They are not constantly fighting themselves. They have made peace with the gap between action and result. They have learned to find satisfaction in the daily practice rather than only in the distant goal. They are patient, but their patience is not a gritting of teeth. It is a genuine comfort with the pace at which meaningful things develop, a recognition that trying to rush the process usually undermines the process, that some things simply take the time they take and cannot be accelerated beyond a certain point without destroying the very thing you are trying to build. This comfort with natural timing is visible in how they respond to setbacks and plateaus. Everyone who builds something over a long time frame encounters periods where progress stops, where effort seems to produce no results, where the path forward becomes unclear. The short-term thinker experiences this as failure, as evidence that they should quit, that they should try something else. The long-term thinker experiences it as information, as a normal part of any extended process, as a signal that they need to adjust their approach or simply need to continue through a difficult phase that will eventually pass. They do not panic. They do not abandon the project. They trust that invisible progress is still happening, that the plateau is temporary, that consistency through difficulty is precisely what separates the people who finish from the people who quit. This trust in continuation, this willingness to persist through periods of no visible progress, is not about being stubborn or refusing to adapt. It is about having a clear enough vision of what you are building that you can tolerate extended uncertainty about whether you are on the right path. You know where you are trying to go. You know why it matters. You know that the path will not be linear, that there will be setbacks and delays and periods where nothing seems to work. But you also know that if you continue making the best choices you can with the information you have, adjusting as you learn, remaining open to feedback while maintaining commitment to the direction, you will eventually arrive somewhere worth being, even if it is not exactly where you initially imagined. This is perhaps the deepest truth about long-term thinking. It is not about having a perfect plan or knowing exactly how things will unfold. It is about having a clear direction and the patience to let the path reveal itself over time, through action and learning and adjustment and continued action. The future is not something you predict. It is something you create, slowly, through accumulated choices that are each small enough to seem insignificant but collectively large enough to shape the entire trajectory of your life. And the satisfaction of this creation, the pleasure of knowing that you are building something that will outlast your immediate circumstances, that will compound and grow and become more than you could create through any single burst of effort, this satisfaction is available in every moment of the building process, not just in the distant moment of completion. Learning to access this satisfaction is what transforms long-term thinking from a difficult discipline into a natural way of being. Chapter 3: Understanding Compound Effect. There is a strange arithmetic at work in the way time shapes our lives. It does not operate according to the logic we learned in school, where 1 + 1 = 2, and everything adds up in neat, predictable increments. The mathematics of consequence follows a different grammar entirely. It is exponential rather than linear, cumulative rather than isolated, and almost invisible until a threshold is crossed. This is the nature of compound effect, and understanding it requires a shift in how we perceive the relationship between action and outcome, between today and tomorrow, between what we do in private and what manifests in public view. Most people walk through life with an accountant's mindset. They make a decision, they observe the immediate result, and they judge whether it was worthwhile. They go to the gym once and step on the scale the next morning. They eat a salad for lunch and expect clarity of mind by evening. They write a single page and wonder why they are not yet an author. This is not foolishness. It is the natural consequence of living in a world that rewards speed, that celebrates instant results, and that has little patience for processes that unfold slowly. But the truth is that nothing meaningful operates on this timescale. The body does not transform overnight. The mind does not rewire itself in a single session. Mastery does not emerge from a weekend of effort. What matters is not the magnitude of a single action, but the direction it points toward and the consistency with which it is repeated. Consider the way water shapes stone. A single drop does nothing. It leaves no mark, no trace, no evidence of its presence. If you were to examine the stone after 1 drop, after 10, even after 1,000, you would see no difference. You might reasonably conclude that water has no effect on stone at all. But given enough time, given enough repetition, the water does not argue with the stone. It does not try to convince it. It simply returns, again and again, and the stone, for all its hardness, eventually yields. This is not because any individual drop became more powerful. It is because the drops were patient. They did not stop. They did not negotiate. They simply continued. The same principle governs human behavior, but with a complexity that makes it harder to see. When you make a decision today, the outcome is not immediately visible. When you choose to read instead of scroll, to walk instead of drive, to listen instead of speak, the effect is microscopic. It does not register on any scale. It does not appear in any mirror. It does not earn applause or recognition. And because we live in a culture that equates value with visibility, we often conclude that the action did not matter. We dismiss it as irrelevant. We move on to something that promises a quicker return. But the action did matter. It set a direction. It laid down a neural pathway. It made the next similar decision slightly easier. And if that decision is repeated, it begins to compound. Compounding is not a motivational concept. It is a structural one. It describes the way systems behave over time when inputs are sustained. In finance, compounding refers to the way interest generates more interest, so that growth accelerates without additional effort. In biology, it describes how cells divide and populations expand. In psychology, it explains how habits form and identities solidify. The mechanism is always the same. Small inputs, repeated consistently, begin to interact with themselves. They do not merely add up. They multiply. They create feedback loops. And at some point, often long after the initial effort has been forgotten, the results become undeniable. But here is where most people stumble. They understand compounding intellectually, but they do not feel it experientially. They know that saving a little each month will grow into wealth, but they do not feel wealthy after the first deposit. They know that exercising regularly will improve their health, but they do not feel healthier after the first workout. And because they do not feel the change, they assume it is not happening. They lose faith in the process. They stop. And in stopping, they reset the equation. They do not merely pause their progress. They erase the momentum they had begun to build. This is the tragedy of impatience. It is not that people fail because they are incapable. They fail because they stop too soon. They withdraw their investment just before it begins to pay dividends. The invisible phase is the most dangerous phase. It is the period where effort feels wasted, where discipline feels pointless, where the gap between what you are doing and what you are seeing feels unbridgeable. This is where most people give up. Not because they tried and failed, but because they tried and saw nothing, and concluded that nothing was happening. But something was happening. It was just happening beneath the surface. The body was adapting. The mind was learning. The skills were forming. The identity was shifting. None of these processes announce themselves. They do not send notifications. They do not provide progress bars. They simply unfold, quietly, in the background, until one day the change is too large to ignore. Think of a bamboo plant. After it is planted, it can spend years underground, developing its root system, with no visible growth above the surface. For 5 years, sometimes longer, there is nothing to see. No sprout. No leaves. No evidence that anything is alive down there. If you did not know better, you would assume the seed had died. But then, in a matter of weeks, the bamboo shoots upward, sometimes growing several feet in a single day. It does not grow quickly because it suddenly became ambitious. It grows quickly because it spent years preparing. The roots were spreading. The structure was forming. The invisible work was being done. And when the conditions were right, all that hidden effort expressed itself in a surge of visible growth. This is how most meaningful progress happens. Not in a straight line. Not in predictable increments. But in long stretches of invisible preparation followed by sudden, undeniable shifts. The writer who publishes their first successful book after a decade of obscurity. The athlete who breaks through after years of training that no one saw. The entrepreneur who becomes an overnight success after a decade of failure. We see the breakthrough, but we miss the build-up. We see the result, but we ignore the process. And because we ignore the process, we misunderstand what success requires. We think it requires talent, or luck, or a single brilliant idea. But more often, it requires nothing more than the willingness to continue when there is no evidence that continuing matters. Consistency is not glamorous. It does not produce highlight reels. It does not generate viral moments. It is repetitive, unglamorous, and often boring. It is doing the same thing today that you did yesterday, and will do again tomorrow, without any promise of recognition or reward. It is showing up when you do not feel like it. It is maintaining standards when no one is watching. It is choosing long-term alignment over short-term relief. And it is this quality, more than any other, that separates those who achieve what they want from those who only wish for it. The psychology of consistency is built on a simple principle. Every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you want to become. If you write one page, you are voting to be a writer. If you skip it, you are voting to be someone who does not write. Neither vote, in isolation, determines the outcome. But over time, the votes accumulate. They form a pattern. And that pattern becomes your identity. This is why small decisions matter. Not because any single one is decisive, but because each one reinforces or undermines the identity you are trying to build. You do not become disciplined by making one disciplined choice. You become disciplined by making many disciplined choices, until discipline is no longer something you do, but something you are. Most people underestimate how much power they have in small moments. They wait for the big decision, the major turning point, the dramatic shift. They think transformation requires intensity, or crisis, or some external catalyst. But transformation is almost always the result of ordinary decisions made repeatedly over time. It is the choice to go to bed on time, to drink water instead of soda, to read instead of scroll, to breathe before reacting. None of these choices feel significant in the moment. But if you make them consistently, they reshape you. They alter your baseline. They change what feels normal. And when what feels normal changes, everything else changes with it. The reason most people give up early is not because they lack ability. It is because they operate with the wrong model of progress. They expect effort to translate immediately into results. They expect a one-to-one correspondence between input and output. And when that correspondence does not appear, they conclude that the system is broken, or that they are not cut out for it. But the system is not broken. It is simply operating on a timescale they did not anticipate. The results are coming. They are just accumulating beneath the surface, in ways that are not yet visible. And if they stop now, they will never see them. There is a concept in physics called potential energy. It refers to energy that is stored in a system, waiting to be released. A boulder at the top of a hill has potential energy. It is not moving, but it has the capacity to move. All that stored energy is simply waiting for a trigger. The same is true for the work you do during the invisible phase. It is not wasted. It is being stored. It is building potential. And when the threshold is reached, when the accumulation becomes too great to remain hidden, the energy is released. The results appear. The change becomes visible. But the work that made it possible was done long before anyone noticed. This is why patience is not passive. It is not resignation. It is not giving up control. Patience is active faith in the process. It is the ability to continue doing what you know is right, even when you cannot yet see the evidence that it is working. It is the discipline to delay gratification, to resist the temptation of short-term relief, and to trust that time, combined with consistent action, will produce the outcome you are working toward. This kind of patience is rare, because it requires you to operate without external validation. It requires you to believe in something that has not yet happened, and to act as if it will, even when doubt creeps in. Short-term pleasure is not inherently bad. There is nothing wrong with enjoying the present, with seeking comfort, with indulging in what feels good. The problem arises when short-term pleasure becomes the primary decision-making criterion. When every choice is filtered through the question of what will feel best right now, you sacrifice the possibility of long-term strength. You trade growth for comfort. You trade compounding for consumption. And over time, this trade becomes expensive. Not immediately. Not visibly. But cumulatively. The person who chooses ease today will find that ease becomes harder to achieve tomorrow. The person who chooses discipline today will find that discipline makes tomorrow easier. This is the paradox of effort. It hurts now but helps later. Avoidance feels good now but hurts later. And most people, most of the time, choose now over later, because now is tangible and later is abstract. But the future is not abstract. It is the inevitable destination of every decision you make today. You are always building toward it, whether you realize it or not. Every action you take, every habit you form, every choice you repeat is shaping the conditions you will live in a year from now, 5 years from now, a decade from now. You cannot escape this fact. You can only choose whether you shape those conditions intentionally or by default. Most people shape their future by default. They let circumstances decide. They let impulses guide them. They drift. And then they wonder why they end up somewhere they did not want to be. But those who understand compound effect do not drift. They aim. They choose. They repeat. And they trust that time, combined with direction, will carry them where they want to go. The compound effect does not care about your intentions. It does not reward good ideas or noble goals. It responds only to action. You can have the best plan in the world, the clearest vision, the most detailed roadmap, and none of it will matter if you do not execute. Execution is the engine. Consistency is the fuel. And time is the distance. The further you go, the more the effect compounds. The longer you stay in motion, the more momentum you build. And at some point, the momentum itself begins to do the work. The habit becomes automatic. The identity solidifies. The results multiply. And what once required immense effort now requires only maintenance. This is the promise of understanding compound effect. It does not guarantee success. It does not eliminate struggle. It does not make the process easy. But it does provide a framework for making sense of effort. It explains why some people seem to achieve extraordinary things with what appears to be ordinary effort. It reveals why consistency matters more than intensity. And it clarifies why time, when used correctly, is not your enemy but your greatest ally. Every day you choose the hard thing, you are investing. Every day you choose the easy thing, you are withdrawing. The balance accumulates. The interest compounds. And the person you become is simply the sum of all those invisible decisions, added up over time, until they become impossible to ignore. There is a deeper truth embedded in this understanding, one that touches on the nature of control itself. Most people feel powerless because they focus on outcomes they cannot control. They want the promotion, the recognition, the transformation, and they become frustrated when these things do not arrive on their preferred timeline. But outcomes are always downstream from process. They are the result of countless small actions, compounded over time, interacting with circumstances and chance. You cannot control the outcome directly. You can only control the inputs. And if you focus obsessively on the outcome, you will miss the only part of the equation you actually have power over, which is what you do today, right now, in this moment. This shift in focus from outcome to process is not just strategic. It is psychological. When you tie your sense of progress to outcomes, you make yourself dependent on things you cannot control. You hand your peace of mind over to forces outside yourself. But when you tie your sense of progress to process, you reclaim agency. You define success not by what happened, but by whether you showed up, whether you did what you said you would do, whether you stayed aligned with your principles even when it was uncomfortable. This kind of success is always within reach. It does not depend on external validation. It does not require permission. It simply requires commitment. The commitment to process over outcome is difficult because it requires you to redefine what winning means. In a culture that celebrates results, it feels counterintuitive to celebrate effort. But effort is the only thing you control. The result may or may not come. The recognition may or may not arrive. The transformation may or may not be visible. But the effort is yours. It is the one certainty in an uncertain system. And if you can learn to find satisfaction in the effort itself, in the act of showing up, in the integrity of the process, you become unbreakable. You no longer need the outcome to feel successful. You are successful the moment you honor your commitment. There is also the matter of identity, which is where compound effect reveals its full power. Most people think of identity as fixed, as something they discover or inherit. But identity is not static. It is constructed through behavior. You are not born disciplined or undisciplined, focused or distracted, resilient or fragile. You become these things through repetition. Every time you act in a certain way, you are casting a vote for a particular identity. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you are voting to be trustworthy. Every time you break one, you are voting to be unreliable. And over time, the votes accumulate into a self-concept. You begin to see yourself as the kind of person who does or does not do certain things. And once that self-concept solidifies, behavior becomes almost automatic. You do not have to force yourself to act in accordance with your identity. You simply act, because that is who you are. This is why starting small is not a weakness. It is a strategy. When you are trying to build a new identity, the goal is not to achieve a result. The goal is to prove to yourself that you are the kind of person who does this thing. If you want to become a runner, the first step is not to run a marathon. It is to run for 10 minutes, and then to do it again the next day, and the next, until running becomes part of your identity. Once it is part of your identity, increasing the distance is easy. But if you try to run a marathon before you see yourself as a runner, you are fighting against your own self-concept. You are trying to behave in a way that contradicts who you believe you are. And that conflict creates resistance, which eventually leads to burnout or abandonment. Small actions repeated consistently do not just produce external results. They reshape internal narrative. They change the story you tell yourself about who you are. And that story is more powerful than any external achievement. Because achievements can be taken away. Circumstances can change. But identity, once established, is durable. It travels with you. It guides your decisions even when no one is watching. It becomes the invisible architecture of your life. The tragedy of modern life is that most people never take ownership of this process. They let their identity form by accident, shaped by habit and circumstance rather than intention. They become whoever their environment tells them to be. They adopt the behaviors of those around them. They internalize the expectations others place on them. And they wonder why they feel disconnected from their own lives, why they feel like they are living someone else's script. But the script can be rewritten. The identity can be rebuilt. It simply requires the willingness to act differently, consistently, until the new behavior becomes the new identity. Understanding compound effect also means understanding the cost of inconsistency. It is not just that inconsistency prevents progress. It actively reverses it. When you start and stop repeatedly, you do not simply pause your momentum. You reset the system. You undo the neural pathways you were beginning to build. You weaken the identity you were beginning to form. And each time you restart, you have to overcome the same initial resistance all over again. This is exhausting. It is demoralizing. And it is entirely avoidable. The solution is not to be perfect. It is to be consistent. Perfect is a trap. Consistent is a choice. The people who achieve long-term success are not more talented. They are not more intelligent. They are not luckier. They are simply more consistent. They understand that the game is won in the daily repetition, not in the occasional burst of intensity. They know that missing one day is not a failure, but missing the same day over and over becomes a pattern, and patterns define outcomes. So they build systems that protect consistency. They reduce friction. They remove temptation. They create environments that make the desired behavior easier and the undesired behavior harder. They do not rely on willpower. They rely on structure. And they understand that the true measure of their commitment is not what they do when they feel motivated. It is what they do when they do not. Anyone can work hard when they are excited. Anyone can stay disciplined when things are going well. But the person who continues when the excitement fades, when progress stalls, when no one is watching and no one cares, that is the person who compounds. That is the person who builds something that lasts. Because they are not dependent on external conditions. They are driven by internal commitment. An internal commitment, once established, is unshakable. This is the quiet power of compound effect. It does not promise speed. It does not offer shortcuts. It does not reward impatience. But it does offer something more valuable than any of those things. It offers certainty. Not certainty of outcome, but certainty of process. If you do the work, consistently, over time, something will happen. You cannot predict exactly what. You cannot control the timing. But you can trust that effort, sustained and directed, always produces change. Always. The only question is whether you will stay in the process long enough to see it. Most people will not. They will stop too soon. They will give up during the invisible phase. They will choose comfort over growth, ease over effort, now over later. And that is their choice. But it does not have to be yours. You can choose differently. You can choose to stay. You can choose to trust. You can choose to continue. And if you do, time will prove you right. Chapter 4: Thinking with Time, Not Emotion. There is a specific moment that determines the trajectory of most lives, and it happens far more often than we realize. It arrives quietly, without announcement, in the seconds between impulse and action. It is the moment when you feel something strongly and must decide whether that feeling will become your compass. Most people never notice this moment because they have already surrendered to it. The feeling rises, the decision follows, and only later, sometimes years later, do they wonder why their life looks the way it does. The pattern is so common it becomes invisible. You feel anxious about money, so you take the job that pays more now but teaches you nothing. You feel lonely, so you stay in the relationship that costs you your self-respect. You feel afraid of missing out, so you say yes to everything and master nothing. You feel angry, so you speak words that burn bridges you will need to cross again. These are not decisions. They are reactions disguised as choices, and they accumulate over time into a life you did not design. What makes this particularly difficult to see is that emotions are not inherently wrong guides. They contain information. Fear can alert you to danger. Anger can signal a boundary violation. Loneliness can indicate a need for connection. The problem is not that emotions exist or that they speak to you. The problem is mistaking their voice for wisdom. Emotions are designed for immediate survival, not strategic living. They optimize for the next 5 minutes, not the next 5 years. When you let them lead, you end up making short-term decisions with long-term consequences, and by the time you notice, the consequences have already compounded. Consider the nature of emotional decision-making. It feels urgent. It feels true. It feels like the only possible response to the situation in front of you. This is because emotions collapse time. When you are angry, the future does not exist. There is only the person in front of you and the need to make them understand, to make them feel what you feel, to restore some sense of immediate justice. When you are anxious, the present becomes unbearable, and you will do almost anything to relieve that discomfort, even if the relief creates larger problems down the line. When you are excited, the potential downsides vanish from view, and you see only the shimmer of possibility without the shadow of probability. This is not a flaw in your emotional system. It is working exactly as designed. Your emotions evolved to help you survive in an environment where the future was uncertain and the present was dangerous. If a predator appeared, you did not need a strategic plan. You needed fear to flood your system with adrenaline so you could run. If a rival threatened your status, you did not need a calm cost-benefit analysis. You needed anger to mobilize your aggression. These responses kept your ancestors alive long enough to become your ancestors. But the world has changed faster than your biology. You no longer face predators in the grass. You face choices that will determine the quality of your life 10 years from now, and your emotional system is still optimizing for threats that no longer exist. The result is a strange kind of suffering. You are constantly driven to act by feelings that promise relief but deliver regret. You check your phone because the anxiety of not knowing feels unbearable, but the checking fragments your attention and makes deep work impossible. You eat the food because the craving feels urgent, but the choice made twice a day for a decade becomes the health you do not have. You avoid the difficult conversation because the discomfort feels too sharp, but the avoidance compounds into resentment that poisons the relationship. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are simply letting a system designed for short-term survival make decisions that require long-term vision. The alternative is not to ignore your emotions or to pretend they do not exist. That path leads to a different kind of suffering, a brittleness that eventually cracks. The alternative is to create distance between the feeling and the decision. This distance is not emotional suppression. It is strategic clarity. It is the space in which you can feel something fully and still choose whether to act on it. Most people never create this space because they believe that feelings and actions are the same thing, that to feel afraid means you must retreat, that to feel attracted means you must pursue, that to feel offended means you must respond. This is the logic of a machine, not a person. You are not required to obey your emotions. You are only required to notice them. Creating this space begins with a simple recognition. When a strong feeling arises, name it. Not to dismiss it, but to see it clearly. The act of naming creates separation. You are not the anger. You are the person noticing the anger. You are not the craving. You are the person observing the craving. This might seem like a small distinction, but it changes everything. The moment you can observe an emotion, you are no longer trapped inside it. You have created a gap, and in that gap, choice becomes possible. The next step is to extend your time horizon. Emotions want immediate resolution. They want you to act now, to fix the discomfort, to seize the opportunity, to escape the pain. But most situations do not require immediate action. Most situations improve with time, either because the feeling fades or because waiting reveals information you did not have in the heat of the moment. The question to ask is not what will make me feel better right now, but what will I be glad I did 6 months from now? This question redirects your attention from the intensity of the present to the consequences of the future. It does not eliminate the feeling, but it removes the feeling's authority over your choices. This is harder than it sounds because your mind will resist. It will tell you that waiting is weakness, that hesitation is cowardice, that if you do not act now the opportunity will vanish. Sometimes this is true. But more often, it is your emotional system trying to regain control by creating a false sense of urgency. The way to know the difference is to ask whether the situation will genuinely be worse if you wait a day, a week, a month. If the answer is no, then the urgency is artificial. It is a feeling, not a fact. And feelings, no matter how intense, do not have the authority to override your long-term interests unless you give them that authority. There is a deeper principle at work here, one that most people never fully grasp. Your present self and your future self are not the same person. They have different priorities, different perspectives, different needs. Your present self wants comfort, excitement, validation, relief. Your future self wants health, skills, relationships, autonomy. These are not always compatible. In fact, they are often in direct conflict. Every time you make a decision based on how you feel right now, you are prioritizing your present self at the expense of your future self. You are taking from tomorrow to pay for today. This is not inherently wrong, but it becomes a problem when it is your default pattern, when every choice is made by the version of you that will not have to live with the consequences. The shift happens when you begin to center your future self in your decision-making. This does not mean ignoring the present. It means recognizing that your future self is also you, and that version of you deserves consideration. When you are tempted to skip the workout, ask what your future self would want. When you are about to send the angry message, ask whether your future self will be glad you did. When you are choosing between the easy path and the harder one that builds capability, ask which choice your future self would thank you for. This is not about self-denial. It is about self-respect. It is about recognizing that you are not just the person you are today. You are also the person you will become, and that person's quality of life depends entirely on the choices you make now. This perspective transforms the nature of discipline. Most people see discipline as forcing yourself to do things you do not want to do. It feels like punishment, like denying yourself pleasure for some distant and abstract benefit. But when you center your future self, discipline becomes something else. It becomes a form of care. It becomes the way you protect the person you are becoming from the impulsiveness of the person you are today. It is not about restriction. It is about alignment. It is about making sure that the actions you take now are consistent with the life you want to live later. The difficulty is that your future self is abstract. You cannot see them. You cannot hear them. They do not send you messages or make demands. They are silent, and because they are silent, they are easy to ignore. Your present emotions, by contrast, are loud. They are immediate. They are insistent. They demand attention, and if you do not create a deliberate practice of listening to your future self, your present emotions will dominate every decision by default. This is why most people drift. They are not making bad decisions because they are foolish. They are making bad decisions because they are listening to the loudest voice, and the loudest voice is always the one that wants something right now. One way to make your future self more real is to visualize them. Not in some vague, aspirational way, but concretely. Imagine the person you will be in 5 years if you keep making the choices you are making now. What does their day look like? What is their energy level? What opportunities do they have? What regrets do they carry? Then imagine the person you will be in 5 years if you start making different choices. What has changed? What has become possible? This is not fantasy. This is projection based on patterns. Your future is not random. It is the logical extension of your current behavior. If you do not like the trajectory, the only time you can change it is now. There is also a useful practice in imagining specific future moments. Not the distant, hazy future, but concrete situations you will face. Imagine yourself a year from now, looking back at the decision you are about to make. Will you feel proud? Will you feel relieved? Will you feel regret? This exercise does something powerful. It collapses the time between now and then, making the future feel less abstract. It gives your future self a voice in the present moment. And when you hear that voice clearly, it becomes much harder to choose in ways that betray it. The relationship between emotion and time is not one of opposition. It is one of hierarchy. Your emotions should inform your decisions, but they should not dictate them. They are one source of information among many, and often not the most reliable one. The longer the time horizon of the decision, the less weight your immediate feelings should carry. If you are deciding what to eat for lunch, your emotions are a reasonable guide. If you are deciding whether to change careers, your emotions are useful data, but they are not the primary factor. The primary factor is whether the choice aligns with the direction you want your life to go over the next 5 to 10 years. Your feelings about the change right now are almost irrelevant compared to the cumulative impact of that change over time. This does not mean you should make decisions that make you miserable in the present. Sustainable choices require some degree of present satisfaction. But it does mean that temporary discomfort is not a reason to avoid a decision that serves your long-term interests. Most valuable things require a period of difficulty before they become rewarding. Learning a skill is frustrating before it is fun. Building a habit is uncomfortable before it is automatic. Repairing a relationship is painful before it is peaceful. If you let your present discomfort veto every worthwhile pursuit, you will never do anything that requires growth, and growth is the only reliable path to a life that feels meaningful. The other side of this is learning to discount intense positive emotions as well. Excitement, enthusiasm, and infatuation are just as capable of distorting your judgment as fear and anger. When you feel a surge of excitement about a new opportunity, that feeling is real, but it is not wisdom. It is your brain responding to novelty and possibility, which are emotionally compelling but not always strategically sound. The question is not whether the opportunity feels exciting. The question is whether it moves you toward or away from your long-term goals. Many people derail their lives not because they made choices that felt bad, but because they made choices that felt too good, choices that promised immediate reward without considering the hidden costs. This is where emotional distance becomes essential. Emotional distance is not coldness. It is not detachment. It is the ability to feel something and still evaluate it clearly. It is the capacity to be excited about an opportunity and still ask hard questions. It is the willingness to feel afraid and still move forward if the fear is not pointing to real danger. Most people collapse under the weight of their emotions because they have never practiced holding them lightly. They have never learned that you can feel something intensely and still not act on it. They have never discovered that the gap between stimulus and response is where all of your power lives. One of the most useful questions you can ask yourself is whether the decision you are about to make is reversible. Some decisions are easy to undo. You can quit the hobby. You can return the purchase. You can apologize for the comment. These decisions have lower stakes, and it is reasonable to let your emotions have more influence. But other decisions are difficult or impossible to reverse. You cannot easily undo a marriage, a child, a career change, a relocation, a public statement. These decisions require a different level of scrutiny. They require you to separate what you feel from what you know. They require you to consult not just your present self, but also your future self, and to give that future self a meaningful vote. Another dimension of thinking with time is understanding the compound nature of choices. A single decision, in isolation, rarely changes your life. But decisions compound. They build on each other. They create momentum in a particular direction. When you eat poorly once, it does not matter. When you eat poorly every day for a year, it reshapes your health. When you avoid a difficult conversation once, it does not destroy the relationship. When you avoid difficult conversations as a pattern, it creates a dynamic where honesty becomes impossible. When you choose the easier path once, it does not define you. When you choose the easier path every time, it becomes your character. The future is not created by single moments of brilliance or failure. It is created by patterns, by the accumulated weight of small choices repeated over time. This is why emotional decision-making is so dangerous. It does not feel dangerous in the moment. It feels like relief, like pleasure, like justice. But because it is optimized for the present, it ignores the compounding effects. It treats each choice as isolated when in reality, each choice is a deposit into the account of who you are becoming. You are not making a decision about this meal, this purchase, this conversation. You are making a decision about the kind of person you are training yourself to be. You are either training yourself to act based on impulse, or you are training yourself to act based on intention. There is no neutral. Every choice is practice for the next one. The good news is that this works in both directions. Just as poor choices compound into a life you did not want, good choices compound into a life you are proud of. The hard part is that the benefits of good choices are delayed. They do not deliver immediate emotional satisfaction. They require you to trust that the future version of you will appreciate what you are doing now, even though you cannot feel that appreciation yet. This is a fundamentally different way of relating to time. It is a way of seeing the present not as the only moment that matters, but as the foundation for all future moments. It is a way of recognizing that the quality of your future depends entirely on the quality of your attention now. Most people live as though the future will take care of itself, as though good outcomes will arrive through luck or external circumstances. But the future does not take care of itself. The future is built, choice by choice, day by day, by the version of you that exists right now. If that version is governed by emotion, by the need for immediate comfort or validation or relief, then the future will reflect that. It will be a future of diminished options, of regret, of wondering what might have been if you had made different choices. But if the present version of you is guided by time, by a clear sense of where you want to go and what it will take to get there, then the future will reflect that as well. It will be a future of compounding capability, of alignment between what you want and what you have, of respect for the person you have become. The transition from emotional thinking to temporal thinking is not a single event. It is a practice, one that requires constant attention. Your emotions will not stop speaking. They will not become quieter or less insistent. What changes is your relationship to them. You begin to see them as signals rather than commands. You begin to notice the gap between the feeling and the action. You begin to ask questions that redirect your focus from the present to the future. You begin to consult the version of you that will live with the consequences, not just the version of you that is feeling the intensity of the moment. This practice is especially difficult during periods of high emotion. When you are angry, afraid, or elated, the idea of pausing to consider the long-term implications feels almost impossible. The emotion is too strong. It demands release. This is where the practice becomes most important. If you can create even a small gap in those moments, if you can breathe, name the feeling, and ask the question about your future self, you will have done something most people never learn to do. You will have exercised the capacity that separates strategic living from reactive living. And over time, that capacity grows. The gap becomes easier to create. The questions become more automatic. The future self becomes more real, more present, more influential in your daily choices. There is also a social dimension to this that cannot be ignored. The people around you are often invested in your emotional decisions because emotional decisions are predictable. If you always act based on how you feel, others can manipulate those feelings to influence your behavior. They can make you feel guilty to control you. They can make you feel excited to sell you something. They can make you feel afraid to keep you compliant. But when you start thinking with time instead of emotion, you become much harder to manipulate. You are no longer swayed by appeals to how you should feel right now. You are asking a different question, a question about consequences, about patterns, about alignment with your long-term goals. This makes you less convenient to others, but it makes you far more effective in your own life. The shift also changes the way you interpret setbacks. When you think emotionally, setbacks feel catastrophic. They generate strong negative feelings, and those feelings drive reactive choices. You fail at something, feel ashamed, and quit. You get criticized, feel angry, and lash out. You experience loss, feel despair, and withdraw. But when you think with time, setbacks become information. They are not emotional events that require immediate resolution. They are data points in a longer process. The question is not how do I make this feeling go away, but what can I learn from this that will make my future decisions better? This reframe does not eliminate the pain of setbacks, but it removes their power to derail you. You are playing a longer game, and individual losses are part of the process, not the end of the story. Ultimately, the practice of thinking with time instead of emotion is the practice of treating yourself as a whole person, not just a collection of immediate needs. It is the practice of recognizing that you exist across time, that the choices you make now shape the reality you will inhabit later, and that you have a responsibility to that future version of yourself. This is not cold or calculating. It is deeply respectful. It is the acknowledgement that you are not disposable, that your future matters, that the person you are becoming deserves the best possible foundation you can provide. Time is not your enemy. It is not the thing that makes you old or takes away your opportunities. Time is the medium in which growth happens. It is the space in which compound effects reveal themselves. It is the dimension in which small, consistent choices become transformative results. But time only becomes your ally when you learn to think with it, when you stop letting the intensity of the present dictate the direction of your life, when you start making choices based on who you want to become rather than how you happen to feel. This is the shift. From reactive to strategic. From emotion-driven to time-informed. From optimizing for the next 5 minutes to designing for the next 5 years. It is not easy, but it is simple. And it is the difference between a life that happens to you and a life you deliberately build. There is a deeper layer to this practice that reveals itself only after sustained attention. Most people assume that thinking with time means always choosing the harder path, always delaying gratification, always prioritizing the future over the present. This is a misunderstanding that leads to a different kind of suffering. The goal is not to sacrifice your present self on the altar of your future self. The goal is integration. It is finding the choices that serve both, the decisions that do not require you to betray one version of yourself to benefit another. These choices exist more often than you think, but they require a different quality of attention to find. Consider the common belief that discipline requires suffering. This belief is so deeply embedded in our culture that most people never question it. They assume that if something feels good, it cannot be building toward anything meaningful. They assume that growth requires pain, that progress requires sacrifice, that any choice that satisfies your present needs must be undermining your future ones. This is not only wrong, it is dangerous. It creates a framework where you are constantly at war with yourself, where every decision feels like a negotiation between competing interests, where you are either indulging the present or serving the future, but never both. The reality is more nuanced. Some things feel difficult in the moment but compound into deep satisfaction over time. Physical training, skill development, honest conversations, and creative work often fit this pattern. They require effort, but the effort is not suffering. It is engagement. It is the feeling of using your capacities fully, of stretching into new territory, of becoming more capable with each repetition. The discomfort is real, but it is not the same as misery. It is the discomfort of growth, which carries its own form of pleasure if you learn to recognize it. On the other hand, some things feel easy in the moment but compound into deep dissatisfaction over time. Mindless consumption, avoidance of difficulty, superficial relationships, and work that requires no growth often fit this pattern. They do not hurt in the present. They might even feel pleasant. But they are erosive. They slowly diminish your sense of agency, your confidence in your capabilities, your belief that you can shape your own life. The ease is real, but it is not the same as peace. It is the ease of surrender, which carries its own form of suffering if you are honest about it. The practice of thinking with time allows you to distinguish between these two types of experiences. It allows you to see that not all difficulty is bad and not all ease is good. It allows you to ask a different question when faced with a choice. Not does this feel hard or easy, but does this make me more or less capable over time? This question cuts through the confusion because it reframes the decision. You are no longer choosing between pleasure and pain. You are choosing between expansion and contraction, between becoming more of who you want to be and becoming less. This distinction matters because many people spend their lives avoiding difficulty only to discover that the avoidance created a harder life. They avoided the discomfort of learning, so they never developed valuable skills. They avoided the discomfort of honest communication, so their relationships remained shallow. They avoided the discomfort of physical training, so their bodies became fragile. They avoided the discomfort of financial discipline, so they remained dependent on others. In each case, the short-term ease produced long-term constraint. The avoidance did not eliminate difficulty. It merely postponed it and amplified it. The inverse is also true. Many people endure difficulty only to discover that the endurance created an easier life. They accepted the discomfort of learning, so they developed skills that opened doors. They accepted the discomfort of honest communication, so their relationships became sources of real support. They accepted the discomfort of physical training, so their bodies became resilient. They accepted the discomfort of financial discipline, so they gained autonomy. In each case, the short-term difficulty produced long-term freedom. The effort did not eliminate ease. It earned it. This is not a call to embrace suffering for its own sake. It is a call to stop confusing temporary discomfort with genuine harm. Most of what stops people from making better choices is not that the choices are too hard. It is that the choices feel uncomfortable, and they have learned to treat discomfort as a signal to stop. But discomfort is not a reliable signal. Sometimes it means you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it means you are doing something right. The only way to know the difference is to look at the pattern over time. Does this discomfort lead to expansion or contraction? Does it make you stronger or weaker? Does it increase your range of options or decrease them? There is also the question of energy. Emotional decision-making is exhausting. It might feel like the easy path because it requires no deliberation, but it drains you in other ways. It creates chaos. It generates conflict. It produces outcomes that require damage control. When you act on anger, you have to repair relationships. When you act on fear, you have to live with the opportunities you missed. When you act on craving, you have to deal with the consequences of excess. The emotional path is not easier. It is just faster. And that speed creates a wake of problems that follow you. Thinking with time is more demanding up front. It requires you to pause, to reflect, to hold competing considerations in mind, to imagine multiple futures and evaluate their relative quality. This takes effort. But the effort is productive. It prevents problems rather than creating them. It generates clarity rather than confusion. It produces outcomes that require less maintenance, less correction, less regret. Over time, this approach actually requires less energy because you are spending your effort on decisions rather than on fixing the consequences of non-decisions. Another aspect that becomes visible with practice is the role of identity. Every decision you make is a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. This is not metaphorical. It is literal. Your brain is constantly updating its model of who you are based on what you do. When you act impulsively, you are training your brain to see you as an impulsive person. When you act strategically, you are training your brain to see you as a strategic person. These self-concepts are not fixed. They are fluid, shaped continuously by your behavior. And they matter because they influence future behavior. If you see yourself as someone who cannot resist temptation, you will approach temptation with resignation. If you see yourself as someone who can delay gratification when it serves your goals, you will approach temptation with confidence. This means that even small decisions carry identity-level implications. It is not just about this cookie, this purchase, this hour of time. It is about whether you are the kind of person who makes choices based on impulse or intention. Each time you pause between feeling and action, you are reinforcing an identity as someone who has agency. Each time you act without pausing, you are reinforcing an identity as someone who is driven by circumstance. Neither of these identities is permanent, but they are self-reinforcing. The more you act in accordance with an identity, the stronger that identity becomes, and the easier it is to continue acting that way. This is why changing patterns can feel so difficult at first. You are not just changing a behavior. You are challenging an identity. Your brain resists because the current identity, even if it produces poor outcomes, is familiar. It is known. There is a strange comfort in consistency, even when that consistency is painful. But the resistance fades with repetition. As you accumulate evidence of acting differently, your brain updates its model. The new identity becomes familiar. The new behaviors become easier. What once required enormous willpower eventually becomes automatic, not because you have more willpower, but because you have shifted who you believe yourself to be. The relationship between time and emotion also changes the way you experience success and failure. When you think emotionally, success feels like validation and failure feels like condemnation. Both are intensely personal. Both are tied to your sense of worth. This makes success intoxicating and failure devastating, which creates a volatile relationship with outcomes. You become dependent on external validation, and you avoid risks because the emotional cost of failure feels too high. When you think with time, success and failure become feedback. They are data points in a longer process. Success tells you that your strategy is working. Failure tells you that your strategy needs adjustment. Neither defines you. Neither is permanent. This removes the emotional charge from outcomes, which paradoxically makes you more effective. You are no longer trying to avoid failure at all costs. You are trying to learn as quickly as possible. This changes the risks you are willing to take, the experiments you are willing to run, the honesty with which you evaluate results. You become more flexible, more adaptive, more willing to change course when the evidence suggests you should. There is also a profound shift in how you relate to other people. When you are governed by emotion, your relationships become transactional. You are drawn to people who make you feel good and repelled by people who make you feel bad. You avoid difficult conversations because they generate discomfort. You stay in harmful dynamics because leaving would be painful. You make promises based on how you feel in the moment, then break them when the feeling changes. This creates instability. People learn they cannot rely on you because your behavior is unpredictable, driven by whatever emotion is strongest at the time. When you think with time, your relationships become intentional. You choose people based on alignment, on shared values, on mutual growth. You have difficult conversations because you know they strengthen the relationship over time. You leave harmful dynamics because you understand that short-term pain is preferable to long-term erosion. You make promises based on what you can sustain, not on what you feel, and you keep them even when your feelings change. This creates stability. People learn they can rely on you because your behavior is consistent, driven by principles rather than impulses. This does not mean you become cold or calculating in your relationships. It means you become trustworthy. It means you show up in ways that serve the relationship over time, not just in ways that feel good in the moment. It means you are willing to invest in connection even when it is inconvenient, and willing to create boundaries even when it is uncomfortable. These are the actions that build relationships of depth and durability, relationships that become more valuable as time passes rather than less. The final dimension of thinking with time is the recognition that time itself is not infinite. You have a limited number of years, months, days, hours. Every moment you spend on something is a moment you cannot spend on something else. This is not meant to create anxiety. It is meant to create clarity. When you understand that your time is finite, you become more careful about how you use it. You become less willing to spend it on things that do not matter to you, less willing to let other people's priorities dictate your schedule, less willing to drift through days without intention. This awareness does not lead to frantic productivity. It leads to deliberate choice. It leads to asking what is worth your time and what is not. It leads to protecting the hours that matter, the relationships that nourish you, the work that uses your strengths, the rest that restores you. It leads to saying no more often, not because you are selfish, but because you understand that every yes to something unimportant is a no to something that matters. The practice of thinking with time instead of emotion is not a technique you master once and then possess forever. It is a stance you return to, again and again, in the face of feelings that want to pull you back into reactivity. It is a question you ask yourself repeatedly. It is a vision of your future self that you keep vivid and present. It is a discipline, but not the grim, joyless kind. It is the discipline of caring for yourself across time, of recognizing that you are not just the person you are today but also the person you will become, and that both versions of you deserve respect, attention, and thoughtful choice. Chapter 5: The Architecture of Long-Term Identity. There is a particular kind of blindness that affects almost everyone at some point in their lives. It is not the inability to see what is in front of you, but rather the inability to see what you are becoming. Most people spend their days reacting to immediate pressures, responding to whatever demand presents itself most loudly, and in doing so, they mistake motion for direction. They are building something, certainly, but they rarely stop to consider what that something actually is. The structure of a life is not created in grand gestures or sudden transformations. It is created in the accumulation of small, seemingly insignificant choices that compound over time into the architecture of identity itself. When you wake up tomorrow morning and decide whether to keep a promise you made to yourself, you are not simply completing a task. You are casting a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. When you choose to delay a difficult conversation because it feels uncomfortable, you are not merely postponing an interaction. You are reinforcing a pattern of avoidance that will shape how you navigate conflict for years to come. Every action, no matter how minor it appears in isolation, is a declaration of identity. The question is whether you are making these declarations consciously or allowing them to emerge by default. Most people approach their goals as destinations to be reached. They set targets, create plans, and measure their progress against specific outcomes. This approach is not inherently flawed, but it contains a fundamental misunderstanding about how lasting change actually occurs. A goal is something you achieve and then move past. An identity is something you inhabit continuously. If you want to write a book, you can set that as a goal and eventually complete it. But if you want to be a writer, you must adopt the behaviors and thought patterns of someone who writes regularly, regardless of whether any particular project is finished or not. The difference is not semantic. It is the difference between temporary effort and permanent transformation. Consider the person who decides they want to get in shape. They join a gym, follow a workout program, and after several months of disciplined effort, they achieve their desired physical condition. Then, slowly, the gym visits become less frequent. The discipline fades. Within a year, they are back where they started, perhaps with a sense of failure added to the original dissatisfaction. This cycle repeats itself millions of times across millions of lives, and the reason is always the same. They were focused on reaching a goal rather than becoming a certain kind of person. They were trying to do something instead of trying to be someone. The alternative approach requires a different way of thinking about time itself. Instead of viewing your life as a series of goals to be accomplished, you begin to see it as a process of identity construction. You ask yourself not what you want to achieve, but who you want to become. This shift in perspective changes everything about how you make decisions in the present moment. When you are goal-oriented, your behavior is justified only by its contribution to a specific outcome. When you are identity-oriented, your behavior is justified by its alignment with the person you are building yourself into. This distinction becomes clearer when you examine how it plays out across different domains of life. Someone who is trying to save money might deprive themselves of small pleasures, counting every expense, and feeling a constant sense of restriction. They may succeed in accumulating a certain amount of money, but the moment they reach their target or encounter a setback, the restriction becomes unbearable and they revert to their old spending patterns. Contrast this with someone who has adopted the identity of a financially disciplined person. They do not experience the same sense of deprivation because their choices are not about sacrifice. They are about consistency with who they understand themselves to be. They spend less not because they are trying to hit a number, but because people like them make thoughtful decisions about resources. The power of identity-based behavior lies in its self-reinforcing nature. Each time you act in accordance with a chosen identity, you generate evidence for that identity. You are not trying to convince yourself of something that might be true. You are observing proof of something that is true. This evidence accumulates in your mind, gradually shifting your self-concept from aspiration to fact. You do not need to believe you are disciplined. You simply need to observe that you have acted with discipline consistently enough that the description becomes accurate. But this process requires patience that most people are unwilling to exercise. We live in a culture that celebrates sudden breakthroughs and dramatic transformations. We are conditioned to believe that meaningful change should be visible immediately, that effort should produce obvious results, and that if progress is not apparent within days or weeks, something must be wrong. This expectation is poisonous to the process of identity construction because identity is not built in moments of intensity. It is built in the quiet repetition of ordinary actions over extended periods of time. There is no single workout that makes you an athlete. There is no single conversation that makes you a good communicator. There is no single decision that makes you wise. These qualities emerge from patterns, and patterns require time to establish themselves. The person who goes to the gym once and expects to feel transformed is misunderstanding the nature of transformation itself. They are looking for an event when they should be looking for a process. They are seeking a result when they should be seeking a rhythm. This is where most people fail, not because they lack the capacity for change, but because they lack the patience to let change unfold at its natural pace. They start strong, full of intention and energy, but when the initial enthusiasm fades and the work becomes routine, they interpret the absence of dramatic progress as evidence that nothing is happening. They do not realize that the most important changes are often invisible while they are occurring. The tree does not appear to grow if you watch it for an afternoon, but return after a season and the difference is undeniable. What makes this patience even more difficult is that identity construction often involves doing things that feel unrewarding in the moment. The disciplined person chooses the harder path not because it feels good, but because it aligns with who they are becoming. The honest person tells the truth even when a lie would be easier, not because honesty always pays off immediately, but because dishonesty would require them to become someone else. These choices accumulate slowly, often without recognition or praise, and the temptation to abandon them in favor of easier alternatives is constant. This is precisely why time becomes your greatest ally if you can learn to think correctly about it. Time does not care about your excuses or your intentions. It only cares about your actions. Every day you show up and do the thing you said you would do, time takes note. Every day you fail to show up, time takes note of that as well. Time is the ultimate accountant of identity, and it keeps perfect records. You cannot fool it with justifications or good reasons. You can only prove yourself to it through consistency. The person who understands this begins to see their daily choices through a different lens. They stop evaluating decisions based solely on immediate outcomes and start evaluating them based on identity implications. When faced with a choice between comfort and discipline, they ask themselves not which option will feel better in the moment, but which option is consistent with the person they are trying to become. This does not mean they always choose the harder path. It means they choose with awareness of what each choice represents in the larger pattern of their life. Over time, this way of thinking creates a momentum that is difficult to break. The person who has acted with integrity for 1,000 consecutive days finds it increasingly difficult to act with dishonesty because doing so would require them to contradict a mountain of evidence about who they are. The person who has shown up to write every morning for a year does not need to debate whether they are a writer. The question has already been answered through their actions. Their identity is no longer a hypothesis to be tested. It is a fact to be acknowledged. But this process also works in reverse, and this is the uncomfortable truth that most people avoid confronting. If every action is a vote for identity, then every inaction is also a vote. Every time you choose comfort over discipline, you are reinforcing the identity of someone who prioritizes comfort. Every time you avoid a difficult conversation, you are strengthening the identity of someone who avoids difficulty. The person you are becoming is not determined by your intentions or your potential. It is determined by what you actually do, day after day, in moments when no one is watching and no one would know if you took the easier path. This is why self-deception is so dangerous in the context of identity construction. You can tell yourself that you are the kind of person who values health while consistently choosing behaviors that undermine your health. You can believe you are someone who values relationships while consistently choosing work over connection. You can think of yourself as honest while regularly telling small lies of convenience. But time does not care what story you tell yourself. It only cares what you do. And eventually, the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are becomes impossible to ignore. The way out of this gap is not through grand resolutions or dramatic commitments. It is through the simple act of aligning your daily behavior with your stated identity, one small choice at a time. You do not need to transform yourself overnight. You only need to win the next decision. Then the one after that. Then the one after that. Each victory is small, often invisible to others, sometimes barely noticeable even to yourself. But they accumulate. They compound. They build the foundation of a life that reflects intention rather than accident. This is not about perfection. You will make choices that contradict the identity you are building. You will have days when you fail to show up, moments when you choose the easier wrong over the harder right, periods when you lose sight of who you are trying to become. This is part of the process, not evidence that the process has failed. What matters is not that you never stumble, but that you recognize when you have stumbled and choose to return to the path. The identity you are building is not fragile. It does not shatter with a single mistake. But it does erode with consistent neglect. Years from now, you will look back at this period of your life and see it clearly for what it was. A series of choices, some large but mostly small, that determined the trajectory of everything that followed. You will see the moments when you chose discipline over comfort, honesty over convenience, patience over immediate gratification. You will also see the moments when you chose otherwise. And you will understand, perhaps for the first time, that these were not separate decisions scattered randomly across time. They were the building blocks of identity, the raw materials from which your character was constructed. The thing you do today may seem small, even insignificant when measured against the scale of your ambitions. It may feel like it barely matters, like one more repetition of an action you have already performed countless times before. But time has a way of revealing what truly matters, and it never mistakes consistency for insignificance. Time knows that the person who shows up when it is difficult is building something far more valuable than short-term results. They are building the capacity to keep showing up, and that capacity is the foundation of everything else. This is not a message of pressure or urgency. It is a message of clarity. You are already building an identity whether you realize it or not. The only question is whether you are building it intentionally or by default. Whether you are becoming someone through conscious choice or through the accumulation of unconscious patterns. Time will pass regardless. The question is what you will have built when it does.